School Lunch and Student Health by Rachel Koo,
Aubrey Masood,
Declan O'Rourke,
and Leah Robinson. And today the question we are addressing is, what regulations, if any, should be implemented to improve nutrition for students in school supplied lunches? For our agenda, we're starting off with background information on the topic and the problem. Then we're moving on to short-term and long-term implications, followed by economic effects, and then moving on into our alternative solution and our main solution.
Starting off with some background, the National School Lunch Program was founded in 1946 with the National School Lunch Act of 1946 that implemented a National School Lunch Program intended to reduce the amount of undernutrition, especially in impoverished communities. Over time, this shifted its focus as obesity began to become the major issue in America. According to Benjamin L. Campbell et al., in 2004, the rate of overweight adolescents ages 2 to 19 rose to 17%, with an additional 34% of children being considered at risk. This led to the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010, which was intended to change the way that school lunch programs were done to lower fat content, reduce calories, and increase fruits and vegetables available to students.
The problem that we are observing today, the poor nutrition of school foods, is a direct reflection of the problems within our culture and society. One of these main problems is the rise of childhood obesity, which can be seen in the graph to the right. This graph demonstrates that since the 1970s, childhood obesity has only been on the rise, with a severe increase in the past 10 years. This can be attributed to, according to a study by the Future of Children in 2006, how schools often prioritize economic revenue generated from school food by selling things like chips and soda that are extremely unhealthy and are detrimental to the health and nutrition of students, but are something that students want to buy, and therefore children are more likely to buy it, and schools can make more money from selling these products. So schools are often prioritizing the economic revenue they can make from school food over the health and well-being of their students. Additionally, systemic inequalities that like socioeconomic status and the quality of schools plays a direct role in the poor nutrition that we are observing. A study conducted by the educational researcher in 2011 showed that schools in areas with a lower socioeconomic status often have food with saturated fat that's more saturated fat at a rate of 20 to 30%. This can be seen causing students to fall into unhealthy habits from a young age, which can affect them in and out of the classroom.
The short-term effects of the current school lunch program and what we aim to solve are the overconsumption of saturated fats. This is a very prevalent problem in America. According to the 9th edition of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which is published by the USDA, 85% of males and 78% of female adolescents ages 14 to 19 consume too many saturated fats for a 2,000 calorie diet. This is a problem because most of these fats are consumed outside of school, but also in the 10% that is allowed in school lunch programs. To solve this problem, we need to reduce the amount of saturated fats in places we can control, like school lunches. Additionally, poor nutrition comes into play as a majority of adolescents are not consuming the correct amount of fruits or vegetables in a day. And this is another problem that might be able to be solved through the school lunch program.
Children consuming school lunch with poor nutrition have also been seen to have lower concentration, decreased test scores, and higher behavioral problems. According to a 2019 study by the Health, Education, and Behavior Journal, it found that students consuming school food were 5 times more likely to have a disciplinary infraction, which can not only impact their academic performance, but also can lead them to have lower confidence, and it can impact their paths outside of school as well.
In the long term, improvements to nutrition programs in schools have a plethora of benefits, including health of the students, cognitive development, and the development of long-term healthy habits. As we've seen with the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, implementation of nutrition programs help increase the amount of fruit and vegetable intake of students within the schools that participated within the program. Additionally, from Haynes Maslow's study, Lessons from the Lunchroom, we've seen that providing more options that are nutritious for students has led to students actually choosing these nutritious options and building better long-term life habits. As we've seen within the graph here, after the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act was passed in 2010, there has already been a decline in obesity rates among students that live within poverty lines. Additionally, from Schwarzenbach's study, do school lunch programs contribute to childhood obesity? He mentioned that the National School Lunch Program is among one of the widest range school lunch programs across the nation. It includes over 100,000 public and even private schools participating within this program, which means that the National School Lunch Program will be the most effective and efficient way to implement new nutritional standards. Additionally, in the long term, we can head towards new technologies, including lab-grown proteins and AI-driven planning for school lunch programs. While these are costly to implement in the start, over the long term, they increase affordability and sustainability for nutrition programs within schools. We can also leverage federal funding programs and government funding, as we've seen with the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. We can continue these federal funding programs to create healthier generations and improve public health on the long term.
We also need to consider the economic effects and the cost behind the school lunch program. Currently, the school lunch program is funded partly through the competitive foods, which are foods that are often found in vending machines, like chips and sugary beverages. And according to Fried and Simmons' 2007 article in the Duke Law Journal, this creates a conundrum from schools for focusing on revenue or student health. However, with reform, if we source foods locally, we can also grow the agricultural industry. We can also have less transportation costs, which gives schools more money to implement this program, sourcing locally, and it can create more jobs for farmers, and it can just support the agricultural economy overall. And in Burevard and Lieb's 2017 Food and Drug Law Journal article, they found that sourcing food locally will lead to more economic growth. With reform, there will also be a more educated workforce. With better nutrition leads to better academic results, which also leads to a more skilled workforce in the future, which can grow our economy. This brings us to our first alternative solution, which is the SNACS program. The SNACS program focuses on educational reform through changing the school environment and teaching kids about the nutrition behind the food that they eat. It was shown to work, and it was shown that after kids participated in this program, they were eating more portions of food and vegetables while eating less portions of sugary beverages. However, there lies two main problems with this program. It has a short duration and it has a relatively high cost. And according to Devaney's article in The Future of Children, he found that it costs $2.11 per student per week for the school to implement this program, which might be too costly for some schools. In addition, the SNACS program only lasts 5 weeks, so it might not be as effective as some long-term solutions.
This leads into our solution, which is a combination of the aforementioned things. Firstly, reducing saturated fat content. To reduce saturated fat content, we are changing the guideline from 10% of the total calories in the meal to 5% of the total calories in the school lunch meals. This will help reduce the amount that children are getting through school lunch programs while not trying to control their diets necessarily outside of school, as it would be significantly more difficult to do. Additionally, to increase fruits and vegetable consumption by students, we're going to be moving to using local providers for fruits and vegetables. Now, one of the limitations that was pointed out is that many people don't have farms near their schools to provide for these local produce. So to accommodate for that, we are not imposing these regulations on a nationwide scale. We are doing a slow rollout program using government subsidies to assist in the crossover from traditional school lunch rules to our regulations that we're suggesting here. This will help schools who are in those areas recover quickly from the economic burden of switching over from a traditional meal plan to this new one using local providers, and it will also boost local economy, which in the long term will have beneficial effects from everyone. Lastly, the other important part about this is that in the long term, this will actually be cheaper because of smaller supply lines and local produce being more accessible to many of these schools. Thank you. Works cited page.
decide to include a particular student's perspective or lens in your overall presentation? Please name that student.
So one major lens that we considered was Rachel's lens, the economic lens, because we were trying to find a solution that we ultimately at the beginning we wanted to find something that could be implemented around the country, but after looking at Rachel's lens, the economic lens, and seeing that it wouldn't really be sustainable to have a one-size-fits-all sort of solution, and instead after analyzing her lens and looking over how the supply chains and like how having a local rollout would allow us to control supply chains on a smaller scale first, and have the rollout of our solution be more sustainable. That is like how we ended up deciding that we wanted to take a more localized approach with the launching of our solution. So I would say that Rachel's lens of the economic side of things ultimately helped us a lot in the logistics of our solution.
Thank you. Leah, an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' reports you decided to exclude from your team presentation, and why?
Again, I think with the economic lens, that raised a lot of
I'll repeat it again. You wish to exclude from your
Yeah.
team presentation.
So essentially, with one of the main parts that was mentioned within Rachel's IRR on the economic lens, she mentioned how a lot of these programs have initially high startup costs. And when I first looked at that, and our team first looked at that, that kind of drove us away from our solution, since it would be hard to implement on a widespread scale. However, even though there are high startup costs, the long-term benefits of implementing our final solution and with the gradual rollout of our programs, it would be more effective in the long run and still be economical across the nation.
Thank you. What was the strongest counter-argument to your solution or conclusion that your team identified, and why was it the strongest? I'll read it again. What was the strongest counter-argument to your solution or conclusion that your team identified? The strongest counter-argument, and why?
I think the strongest counter-argument to our solution was the difficulty of using it on a nationwide scale, because of, as mentioned, there are a lot of places, especially urban areas, that don't have local producers that can provide certain things. There's simply not space for orchards and fields near Chicago, for example. It provides a lot of difficulty for enabling this program to work on a nationwide scale, which I think would be the biggest counter argument to us, is that it's difficult to roll this out on a nationwide scale without some significant changes to it.
Okay. And finally, Rachel. Having finished your project, what do you consider to be a gap in your team's research? And if addressed, it would make you feel more confident about your conclusion.
So a gap in our solution is that we didn't really analyze how efficient it would be to implement this program politically, because it requires a lot of passing of legislation from Congress. So if we did look more into some of the policies that politicians have supported in the past, I would feel more confident about the solution.
Thank you. Round of applause.